Hello, everyone. Ben with iAdvise here. Welcome back to another episode of Conversation, short, insightful conversations with CX leaders around the globe. I am extremely thankful and excited to be here today. Boy, are you in for a treat. The topic of today's discussion is all about a CX leader's first year in the role, specifically how they set milestones for a successful transformational roadmap. It is my absolute pleasure to be joined today by Tabitha Dunn, the Chief Customer Officer at Ericsson, a Swedish multinational networking and telecommunications company and leading provider of 5G network in the US. As Chief Customer Officer, Tabitha is the head of customer experience and global sales excellence. Her responsibilities include designing the customer experience strategy, building out best practices, and driving the roadmap for improvement and developing the measures for tangible progress. Tabitha's truly an expert in the field as she has over 20 years of experience. Prior to joining Ericsson, she served as the Vice President of Customer and Partner Experiences at SAP. She's also the former Global Director of Customer Experiences at Philips Medical Systems. Having said all of that, it is an absolute honor to be joined by Tabitha Dunn for today's topic, setting the milestones for a successful transformation roadmap and a CX leader's first year. Thanks for joining, Tabitha. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, happy to have you. How have you been? I always like to start by asking that. 2 years into the pandemic, it's our new normal is not so new anymore.
No, it's not quite the same, but I have to admit, this year starting off a little more chaotic than most because I've had the great opportunity to work for Ericsson, being based in Stockholm, Sweden, for the last 2.5 years. But just 2 weeks ago, we have moved back to the United States in Bellevue, Washington. Very similar weather, but a lot more boxes in our house right now.
Got it. Well, welcome back to the States. I definitely don't envy you having left Sweden before the interview started. I was telling you, I studied abroad in Florence. Europe is a great place. So try to make the most of your time back here, I guess.
Indeed.
All right, so let's just get started right away, jump right in. One thing we'd like to ask our guests is to put themselves in the shoes of a customer. Just thinking back to maybe the last 2 years or even before then, what's a memorable customer experience you've had?
I would say that, I love the fact that, I most of my career has been in B2B customer experience, but I take a lot of my inspiration from my husband and I love to go to wonderful restaurants to eat out. And that often means that when we find someplace special, we end up becoming regulars there. And as we were saying goodbye to many of the friends we made in Sweden, several of them were people who ran restaurants or worked in the restaurants where we had become regulars over that time. And what I thought was truly special was just how incredibly thoughtful and kind many of them were. At one of the restaurants, the chef offered to make us anything that we wanted and ended up staying after the meal. It was nothing on the menu. And we spent hours with one of the owners and one of our friends there and the chef just talking and spending time. At another place that we love to go to, they remember there's this dish called beef ribberry in Sweden, and I hope I haven't butchered that too badly. But it was one of my husband's favorite dishes. And so they invited him on our last day there to come back into the kitchen, and the chef taught him how to make it so that when he's here in the United States, he can still make the dish. And it's those personal connections and that I understand you and I appreciate you that make experiences memorable. And for many people, they think that that's something you could do in B2C. You can do that in restaurants when you're face to face with people. But there's this impression you can't do that in B2B customer experience because there's all of this technology maybe between you and the customer. But I've found in all the years that I've worked in customer experience that that's not true. It's really just understanding what your customers really want and need and being there for them in the way that they need you to be there for them. And so that's always what I remind myself when it comes to customer experience is recognize who you serve and how you can help them.
I mean, that's an incredible customer experience and one that I definitely envy, to be honest. Thank you for such an insightful answer there. And it kind of leads us into our next question. I mean, you talk a lot about the difference between B2C and B2B. Within the B2B space, the chief customer officer is a relatively new role. Uh, how has the pandemic impacted that role, and how has it evolved since you became involved in this space?
So I'm lucky to be one of those early pioneers in customer experience. I still remember as I was leaving my role in Philips, I had some people telling me, "Why would you leave a great career doing other things? Why would you go do this CX thing again? You did it well, but is that really a career?" And I'd like to think that it turns out it is really a career and a job. And it's my thought process around what customer experience really can do for us is that for many companies, they struggle with how to change effectively and how to truly transform. And that's because there's an element of customer experience that often gets left on the table, which is human centered design. And as really thinking about who are the humans that you serve and how do you design around their needs, whether those are customers, employees, partners, or all of the above, that as those types of concepts and the ability to really understand what people need and how that helps them change and make that change sticky, that is elevating the role where, these days you see a lot of director level customer experience jobs, which I'm super excited about from a career growth and seeing many of the people I've mentored in the field grow their careers. But you really are seeing more companies start to understand that a senior executive who is a seasoned leader that has customer experience as the core of their background are actually outstanding at helping them get the most out of their investments that they're trying to make and driving change in their business. And in most cases, that's digital change, which is really a lot of companies are struggling with making stick.
It is, you're very much so right about that. And that's, I think, one of the challenges that CX leaders face when entering the role. And I know the topic of today's discussion was going to be largely about that first year in the shoes. You're surrounded by a lot of tasks, a lot of challenges. Uh, what common mistakes do CX leaders make when they embark upon a CX transformation?
Well, it's been my experience that most CX leaders are incredibly passionate about what they do. And once they get a hold of the voice of the customer, they really are um, driven to want to see the company clearly see what they can see and what the customer needs are. And they can often become very quickly frustrated by the fact that the company might not see what they see, or maybe don't choose to act the way that they want them to right away. And the biggest opportunity that they have in that first year is not only understanding what their customer needs, which is going to be natural to them from a job perspective, but also understanding what matters to their company. How does that company make decisions? Is it a more financially based business case? Is it more of a change based, efficiency based? Who makes those decisions and how do they actually make investment choices? Because the better you can understand both how a company chooses to invest and what types of projects and who makes those decisions, then you can tie that to what's most important that will solve a need for your customers, for the business, and for your employees. That's the business case you need to pull forward first, because that's how you gain credibility. And that's also how you get traction with the next case that you want to bring forward, where you want the company to change the customer experience for the better.
Got it. Having said all of that, what are the first or core challenges to even address when designing a CX program? Where does one start? What's the first task that should be tackled?
Well, having built 5 customer experience practices, I'd like to say that they were, we all start in the same place, but we really don't. It depends on where the company is in their journey. But one of the key things you have to start with is who are your customers? And do you actually understand what those customer needs are across the entire customer base? you may not weight those needs equally. Maybe that some customers have more value, or changing their experience will have more benefit to both the customers and the business, or so forth. It's how you segment your customers. But having that core understanding across all of your customers, from both the voice of the customer, but also the voice of the employees who interact with customers every day, becomes incredibly valuable, and you're being able to represent them, because that's effectively what customer experience does. Is that first stage is, here I can represent to you, what do we need to fix and why do we need to fix it, and what's the impact it will have when we do so. And that really has to be the first piece you have to do. And that means being able to have a well structured and well set up voice of the customer program. You have to have really good roots in both quantitative and qualitative research skills. You, particularly these days, need to have a lot of the governance background, understanding data privacy and information handling, particularly if you work in a global role. There is a lot of information you have to know about laws and how you get feedback and what you could do with it and who has access to it and how you have to manage it, as well as things like the right to be forgotten and GDPR and so forth. And so, those are the three areas when it comes to really capturing that customer voice, is where most people need to start. After that, it's building the case for change.
I like that, building the case for change. And on that journey, I mean, you touched upon this. It's all about assessing and analyzing as things come up. Um, how does that process work? How do you actually assess and analyze the gaps within an organization's customer experience journey? Is there a method, or is there a best practice that CX leaders should engage in?
I, I think that it works best if you start with qualitative insights, meaning that you spend some time interviewing customers, really listening to them, asking probing questions. This is where, having really good design thinking and experienced design skills help, because you get better at answering, what customers' questions are, and being able to probe deeper into what their needs are. You also go through and talk to those employees. So that whole qualitative insight gathering in the beginning gives you a better understanding of what are the stories. And you know that you've captured enough qualitative insights when you start to hear many of the same types of stories or feedback over time, particularly because in a B2B environment, you're looking at the entirety of the customer journey, from the point where they become aware of your brand to where, if you do all things well, they become advocates on behalf of the solutions that they get from you. Then you go into quantitative, because that's where you make sure that you understand what the pain points are and what things you get right, because what you don't want is the company to break those things while they're trying to fix other things. And so you do that quantitative insight analysis. You map it back to, what did you learn in that qualitative stage? What did you miss? How does that really fit into the customer journey? You segment your customers, and then you go back to qualitative. And that qualitative research is, once you start pulling out, here are the moments that matter most to our customers. Here's the good ones. What are the stories that really represent and bring those good moments to life? And then here are the not good ones. And again, the same thing, you need stories that bring that to life, because stories are part of how we connect. We make decisions with data, so we've captured a lot of data in that quantitative stage, but now that last qualitative stage brings it to life and helps people connect to it and really understand what, you want to go on together as a journey for making things better.
Understood. So once you have an understanding of the situation within your organization, you've done the qualitative research, you've done the quantitative research, what realistic objectives can leaders set for their first year of CX transformation? Obviously, Rome isn't built in a day. What is the first type of goal that a leader should take?
What's interesting is, I find that most people and most companies, because we care a lot about KPIs or objectives and key results, so we have all of these metrics out there, is usually what most people set as a goal is, I want 5-point improvement in NPS, or a 10-point improvement in customer effort score, or whatever your customer metrics are. And the challenge with that is, a customer experience isn't one moment in time. which means that you can improve one area of the customer experience and that would be better, but maybe some other part gets broken. So, for example, we've had a lot of supply chain issues across the world in every business out there, right? That means that for some, the customer scores are going down. So, no matter how much good work you're doing, improving the experience elsewhere, the supply chain might drag the score down, and then you don't achieve your goals with that setting the number of points improvement. So, I always advise that if you take care of the customer experience and you work on the right things, the numbers will go up because the experience will get better. And so it's best to set goals around we're going to improve this stage of the customer journey. We're going to specifically target this part of the customer experience. And then we have to set measures in place that say, how will we know when we've improved that area? And then we know that we can move on to another area of the experience. That way, the company doesn't lose the energy and focus it has because maybe the numbers overall didn't go up because someplace else is suffering, perhaps. But instead, you can see clear progress in the area that you set your goals and you are fixing the experience there.
Thinking back to your first year at Ericsson, what did you accomplish? And then how was it different from your previous experiences? I mean, you said it yourself, not all CX transformation journeys are the same. Is there any insight you could share about, that first year and the ways it differed really?
Yeah, part of it was that Ericsson had already been on part of the customer experience improvement journey, which is a nice opportunity to step into how do we take it to the next level. So, as I described, most of the time in your first year, you're trying to understand your voice of the customer and what those needs are. We actually started with where do we want our customer experience to go? So there are six core disciplines to customer experience. There's, your strategy, which is what do you want your experience to become? What are your priorities? You have culture, you have insights, you have governance, you have journey mapping, and you have experience design. We actually started with the strategy. And for us, we were really trying to understand what is that North Star? What do we want our experience to become? Because what we had was a tremendous amount of passion across our people for our customers and the desire to make the experience better. But what we noted was people had different ideas. If you'd asked 100 people, each of them to describe what should Ericsson's customer experience become, they would give me different answers. Some of it might overlap, but then you have 100 people working on good things, but going 100 slightly different directions. So the
Hmm.
idea was, how do we define what Ericsson's experience needs to become? So we could work towards that. And then we needed to do a full and quantitative baseline in order to understand the current experience. And then how far were we away from that experience we wanted it to become?
And this kind of leads me into my next question. Like, how do you even measure this success on an individual level? Like, of course, you can measure long term the impact of a customer experience on NPS and other KPIs, but on an individual level, from an operational standpoint, how should leaders measure their success?
Well, I think that a CX leader has to measure their success on the development of three areas. So one of them is the capabilities of your team that you build. They have the right CX skills and knowledge. The second is on the program of CX itself and how are you working towards those six disciplines and making sure that you have the right structure in there. That's everything from data to tools to the competencies. And then the third is really measuring ourselves on, are we working on the right things and have we been able to persuade our fellow leaders to really invest or co-invest with us on that journey to improve the customer experience. From the leaders, other leaders in the business, they have their own metrics they're being held to. So a big
Hmm.
part of building the case for change with them is understanding how do they define success in their part of the business and how can you help them tie improvements to customer experience to what matters most to them. I often say that we as customer experience practitioners are great at listening and understanding what matters most to customers, but we don't often actually think about turning that listening and understanding skill set back into the business to understand our peers and our colleagues and the leaders in our business so that we know what matters most to them and we can really knit the two together. And that is really an important stage at building success.
Thank you for that answer. And you talk, about this interconnectedness, and I just want to kind of pivot back to your role at Ericsson. I know you lead the customer experience, employee experience, and sales excellence departments. In what three ways are these interconnected?
In Ericsson, our salespeople are really not just salespeople. They ultimately own the relationship with our customers. And so in this scenario, they're the people who have an incredible depth of knowledge about what our customer needs are, what's driving them towards their own success in their marketplace. And it's that depth of connection that they have that really actually makes them great partners. And so, these three things tie together because if you can improve the employee experience for those who sell to our customers, which was a piece that I own, and you can really drive efficiencies and technology that helps them in their experience so they can spend more time with customers. And you're working on improving the customer experience at the same time, which there's nobody who has not been a customer facing role who can't tell you about how difficult it can be when you can see clearly what the customer pain points are and no one listens to you, or you feel like the company's not acting on them. So this is where having the salespeople, their experience, the technology that supports them, and the customer experience all together in one team, that turns out to be really beneficial in driving a better understanding of the customer needs and building a case for change.
So, reflecting on your career so far, you've built five successful global customer experience functions really from the ground up. If you could go back and start your career in CX all over again, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, that is probably the toughest question.
I don't mean to put you
I
on the spot.
one of the things that I love to do is mentoring and coaching, and particularly early talent in customer experience. And I think that for me, I wish that I had, spent as much time early on in my career in the experience design space as I did in the research and the quant side. I love that, that's where I had a lot of my roots and my background, but I wish that I had spent as much time on that side. I think it is difficult for many young talent in the field to really have the chance to work in all six of those disciplines. But yeah, I wish that I had split my time equally between experience design and design thinking as I did on the research and the quantitative case building.
Thank you. Thank you for very much for that thoughtful answer. And thank you for taking the time today to go through these questions and talk about the importance of that first year in the role. And of course, all about your career and journey up until your current position at Ericsson. So it was an absolute pleasure to have you on. I really wish you and your family a safe start to the year and welcome back to the US, of course. And I look forward to following your journey more on LinkedIn and so on. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.